shadow with it?
I don't know when it's gonna.
Tries to straight up drill.
I don't know what Andrew and I, when we were doing the Ellen dance thing behind him, we were like, and he kept turning around.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
He didn't see us, and he turned around again, and we do it again. We're like, no, it's such a video.
Yeah.
Come on, Chris. Present it to Ellen. This is our teacher.
I have a delayed.
All right, I'm ready to roll, folks.
Selena, would you like to sit on this nap with us?
I guess so. I mean, I thought it was going to be
all,
filming.
yeah, we are all on this
We're
side.
always like on this side, like
Did you not shower today?
No, I just came from work.
All right, so Chuck and I had a good conversation last time as we were getting done with class. And all we did and all this test reflected was everything to do with anaerobic exercise, which could be worded and viewed and thought about like 25 different ways, which is why there was like 24 questions that really all ask the same thing. So today's a shift toward aerobic exercise and where that happens. But before I get there, two recent events. There's always some recent events that allow me to like link one class to another class. In fact, this morning I learned that. And 2 days ago, Frank, I'll get to that in a second. This is Artichoke Spinach Day. On Tuesday mornings, I volunteer for a food shelf with the guy that runs it. So we go to Whole Foods markets and pick up foods that they're getting rid of. This could not be put on the food shelf and given away. If you look carefully at what's happening to the cover, see?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's producing gas. By the way, that's another way you can know that yogurt bacteria are dead. Just take some plastic wrap with a rubber band, put it on tight, and if it doesn't rise, you know there's no fermentation in it. So that's a good way. You know, you'll find a lot of people too when they talk about fermented foods. Well, if it's fermented, then you're eating lactic acid or a variety of acids, acetic acid, vinegar, or lactic acid. But the true benefit are foods that are not fermented. So there's fermentable carbohydrates like onions, berries. Those are the foods that feed your bacteria. They have to eat. They don't eat themselves. So two things sort of wrong thinking about people that when they're thinking, oh, I eat fermented foods. Well, one, you're just eating acid, which would be in butter or vinegar. And two, you're not even going to feed your gut flora to help them multiply at all. So it's still the semi-sweet sugars and fermentable carbohydrates that you really want to eat, ideally speaking. Yeah.
Is frozen like fruits just as good as fresh ones, or?
Pretty much.
Okay.
There's been cases where they've measured the vitamin content in frozen, and sometimes it's higher than fresh because it can lose during transport. So.
Because I always do like frozen fruits and stuff like that, so I don't know if it's actually beneficial.
In fact, with grapes, you know, I've made wine at home with grapevine I've had. And some people go to Midwest Supply, which is a huge warehouse now. Since the tap rooms have grown, they're selling their equipment like hotcakes for people that want to do home brewing. You can buy grapes from California and make the same wine that you're buying like in a liquor store, if you're good at processing it and giving it the right TLC and the conditions. But the point is that once you freeze the grapes, those grapes aren't going to be any different from the fresh ones, really. As soon as you put them in a freezer, nothing's happening. So, the other thing is, where is gas produced in the body? You'll find a lot of people, like I had a friend just 2 days ago, went to her house, I made her chicken soup. She had an upset stomach, she said. But when I went over there, she actually had diarrhea. So what's actually happening? What's the difference between an upset stomach and somebody that has diarrhea?
Well, your body is trying to get rid of whatever it is, so you're not, the food is just going to, or you're eating something that your body is thinking is an enemy and it doesn't like it, so it gets rid of it right away.
Yeah, let's talk about the anatomy. Okay, upset stomach is one thing, and you were right on with this. What's the other body part where gas is actually produced? Exactly. So a lot of people, when they think they have an upset stomach and they're cramping and full of bloated gas, it's not their stomach.
Right.
It's the intestines. And if you have a bacterial infection, back to like, say, people that have leaky gut, gluten intolerances, once you start absorbing things that are either undigested, partly broken down, not broken down all the way. Or if it's bacteria, your body protects itself by just washing it out. And how does it do it? It doesn't absorb the water. You don't reabsorb the water. So rather than a stool being firm with the water removed, it remains a slurry and your body washes it out. To show you how sensitive some people's small intestines and their colons are, runner's trots on very hot days. Anybody here ever hear of runner's trots? Usually there's one or two students. Like at one class I had 23 people, a couple of hands went up. In fact, 2 of the runners experienced it. Extreme heat. Start running on like a 90-degree day. The cells of the small intestine are so sensitive, they open up and dilate. They more or less are expanded, and they get holes in them. Permeable. You can say they become more permeable. So what's going to absorb? What lives in your gut?
Bacteria.
Yeah. So what does the body do to not absorb bacteria? That runner has to go in. This is actually what every runner that has ran in the heat experienced that, not me. Suddenly they're diving behind the bushes, pulling their pants down because they can't even hold it in. So diarrhea, protecting the gut. Now my friend, let's go back to my friend. So she had diarrhea. Another friend of hers went to her house the day before and gave her some stuff to lower stomach acid. She ended up taking baking soda and 3 Tums. Now, why would this make the diarrhea worse? If you eat any food with lower stomach acid, the food isn't broken down completely. So if the food isn't broken down completely and it goes into a gut that's already leaky, then you've got the beginning of, say, any intolerance toward proteins that absorb into your body unbroken down.
We actually just learned that in wellness coach, and I was actually last week's topic, that a lot of people, when they have heartburn, that's what they do with Tums. So what they're doing is lowering the acid content, and when it's not acidic enough, so all of that, I think you talk about it here, all of the different enzymes that is secreted when that acidic food passes through, then they don't, so then...
Into the small intestine.
Right, into the small, so then all of that bacteria, that's what really pushes, giving the pressure, and pushes all the way back.
So to repeat that, just so everybody's on the same page, people with low stomach acid, in fact, a week and a half ago, the seminar I gave at Linden Hills Co-op, when I spoke about low stomach acid, I said it's often misdiagnosed, and people might be put on Prilosec. Now, if a person has low stomach acid, what she just said there is that the pyloric sphincter between the stomach and the small intestine doesn't open up because it refuses it in a way. So the food regurgitates, the acid regurgitates. So a lot of people are diagnosed with high stomach acid, and they're given antacids or Prilosec. Well, that just makes it worse. You lower the stomach acid more. You can't break the food down. An old woman, probably in her mid-70s, maybe in her 80s, spoke up. She said, I was on Prilosec for 10 years. She told the whole audience. her health continued to decline. She ended up seeing a bone expert because she was losing bone density. She felt terrible. First question he asked was, are you taking Prilosec? He didn't mess around. Are you taking Prilosec? She said, yeah. Immediately, stop taking it, was what he told her. And she tweaked her diet out, completely different human being. So that's very common. People are misdiagnosed. Or they don't know the difference between the stomach and the small intestines.
Well, going back to what you said about eating a fermented food, so basically you said you're just eating lactic acid or whatever. So
If it's fermented, past tense, fermented means it actually fermented.
right. So it has already been fermented, so you're eating it, right? So how is that different from, say, I don't know, mixing like a cider vinegar, like with your water before you eat? Is that going? I mean, it might help with the acidity of your stomach or whatever.
Barely at all. It's such a weak acid. The hydrochloric acid is much stronger. Yeah.
Okay.
And case in point, let's push this with comparing animals. Lions, for example, carnivores, have hardly any bacteria in their digestive tract. Instead, like a dog, dogs' intestines, their stomachs, the acid is 10 times stronger. Same thing with lions, it's many, many times stronger. Why? They're eating raw meat. All they have to do is really break, the acid just needs to break that down. They don't need much bacteria after that to absorb it.
Right, because meats are acidic forming. Now, here's my other question to that. I ran into some other literature out there when I was writing a research paper about acid forming foods.
Wait a minute, you went on a wrong track. You're connecting the ideas wrong. Right there. She just said that, forget about the acid forming thing. Okay, I got whey protein in this. Basically, you ever see the statement, pre-digested, partially broken down? What does protein break down to?
Amino acids.
Yeah, dipeptides or amino acids, or just peptides, same thing as amino acids. So, little story for you. If you take burn victims, divide them into two groups, give one group whole food protein like they used to, let's say 40 years ago, even 30 years ago, with quality protein like egg white. Okay, even if it's liquefied, to get it in, make it easy to digest. The control group that got whey protein lost 50% muscle mass, lost 50% less muscle mass than the regular food group. That's because when protein breaks down into dipeptides, if it's broken down, then you assimilate it instantly. You don't. So it's, forget about the acid forming right there. You're misleading people with a different thing. And I want to. If you read that entire thread that I sent you on acid, everything breaks down the acids in the body, practically everything. And most people are misled with the acid-forming diets. I'll cover that. I recommend everybody read that link. Sometime in the future, I'll send it out. But let's not go there right now, because it's that transition now we're not ready for it. Thanks. Sorry.
So it wasn't about the link that you said, it was about something else, but that's
yeah. So, but let's stay in the small intestine and stomach. Stomach is just acid. It breaks the food down, and hopefully completely. A lot of women, especially, more so than men, are really low in stomach acid after age 45 or 50. Simple solution. So what did I do for my friend? Well, she lowered her stomach acid, so the first thing I wanted her to do was to have something that's so easy on the stomach, not high protein to have to break it down, but anything that's really easy to digest. So even though I had chicken, I made chicken soup that was completely broken down into easy to digest form, and pineapple. And a little bit of cheese. The casein actually kind of binds the gut up a little bit. But basically, and with HCl tablets. So I had her take an HCl tablet. The woman that I spoke about, the 70-year-old woman at the co-op, same thing. She started taking that bone doctor put her immediately on just HCl. Go to any co-op. It says HCl, hydrochloric acid. That's what stomach acid is. So yeah, remember I said I'll be talking about burn victims a little bit later. Because when I cover protein a little more in depth, I'll cover that. So you guys got the fermentation thing down. Like I said, we're going to transition into oxidative or aerobic metabolism. So what is an egg really? So it's a single cell, actually. So pretend there's a shell on this though, and it's being incubated by a mother hen. Everybody knows it needs warmth or incubation to hatch an egg. How does the developing chick get oxygen? It's breathing.
Is it somehow permeating through the eggshell?
Yep. The eggshell is actually permeable to oxygen. That's where the oxygen comes from. But your cells, where's the oxygen coming from? Yep. And ultimately it's coming from where?
The air, breathing.
And then when you breathe it in, it's dissolved as what in the blood?
Iron oxide.
Well, you're breathing what?
Oxygen.
Correct. And it's dissolved as what in the blood?
O2.
Yeah, it's not changed. All the way down to the cell level. So if you look at the drawings that people do, at concept 12, which is in today's lesson. These are hard to see on a screen right now, probably. Let me use that one. Kill the middle light.
I know the guy that wrote that.
Read all?
Yeah. He worked at a gym I used to work out at.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he's doing well.
No, I'm not going to draw on this. Repeatedly through this class, I'll be referring to the circle, like bar coaster. You guys will get good at drawing this, and then we're going to leave it behind, because what this will lead to is how to understand all the types of fatty acids and healing and regeneration of cells. If you guys get this visual down, then everything from here doesn't change, and it's the same the whole time. And really the reason to bring you here is you can understand any diet and what happens to the body physically, medically speaking, physiologically speaking, if you're understanding what's happening to cells. So what this guy wrote, or drew, mitochondria, bacterial section, he labeled everything perfectly, pretty much. And he just made a little pathway there, oxygen coming in. So at the capillary level, which is the smallest unit for blood vessels, oxygen diffuses in. And then respiration is basically fire. And then carbon dioxide comes out. And then all the way back up the lungs, you blow it out. So it's just O2 in, CO2 out. And that's what's happening with an eggshell, a developing chick. Now, like I said, I'll often refer back to earlier lectures. Remember I mentioned how honey used to be used in the Civil War to apply on wounds? And I also showed you that one video of that cardiologist saying infants, not infants, but fetuses in the womb. He said where glucose is relatively abundant, the fetus develops and runs mainly on sugar. So when you get when you're getting early growth, the respiration act is actually altered or slanted toward wanting to bring sugar into the mitochondria. But like this cardiologist said, after you're born, that reverses, and then fat becomes the main fuel. Some of you might get into this other guy named Ray Peat. He is mentioned, refers to the research that looks at brain development. Now, brain development is a popular thing in today's culture, right? With autism, vaccinations, intelligence, blah, blah, blah. When they inject glucose into the developing chick egg, guess what happens to the brain? Yep. Yep. And so this is alluding to like a guy's writing, his name is Ray Peat. And if you start reading this guy, he's a genius. And everything he talks about is basically about healing, regeneration, history of the science of physiology, solving problems that actually occur to the body, but it's always about the cell and what happens to a cell, which is actually the entire body still at the same time. So let's talk about the dogs again. How many of you read the week 5 stuff already? I expanded it big time last night, by the way. To make this a little easier for people, 12 concepts, 1 through 12 labeled. There's only 12 concepts on this entire thing. So, I excerpted this article, and they call it Learn Fat Burning Secrets from Sled Dogs. Crack the Metabolic Secrets of Distant Racing Canines. So I'm going to go over each concept one by one here today. So just like the exam I had with the wolf running, several hours. Well, sled dogs in races are running for hours, day after day after day after day. And the problem is glycogen depletion. But they found that these dogs end up not burning, not wasting out the glycogen. And I remember, before I even read this article, I thought, there could only be one answer only. Has to be the fat. Has to be. Where else would what else would it burn? Provided it's getting 12,000 calories a day, which it is. They're giving these dogs 12,000 calories. So, the guy they interviewed for this says the muscle cells start extracting fat directly from the blood and somehow transports this fat across the cell membrane and into the cell where it can be burned as fuel. And then they say 60% fat. The diet, 60% fat and 40% carbs. What I really care about is what he said is somehow transport the fat into the cell. That's not mysterious at all. That's what you're doing right now, sitting here. So here's a graph I haven't shown anybody yet. Let me blow it up. 3 to 4 hours of exercise, high intensity, sustained in a human. Everybody knows muscle glycogen is wasted, so after 4 hours, the person's basically depleted. The blue and the red represents the fat. Remember my analogy with corn, the difference between a corn-fed and a grass-fed cattle? Which one? What's the difference in the meat and the meat slab between corn-fed and grass-fed? What does the corn-fed one look like? Pretend that I have a slab right now. So yeah, what is a corn-fed commercial regular old steak going to Cub Foods? You're looking at it like a sirloin steak. What does it look like? It's red, right? But what else? What other colors do you see? White. Yeah. You see the marble, they call them marbling, right? But you compare it to a grass-fed animal, what's the difference?
Very, very red, super lean.
Bingo. So where's the muscle triglycerides are fat. So what you see in the blue right here is the muscle triglycerides being used. And that's 25% of the energy for exercise, even at a pretty moderately to high intensity. And then the other portion is plasma fatty acids. Okay? So more than half of the fuel is coming from fat, even during pretty high exercise. Glycogen is just wasted. So even in a human who's sustaining movement for far distances, and once the glycogen is wiped out, what happens? We rely more on fat. And the fat is being transported into the cell, across the cell membrane, into where? Here's a bunch of circles up here. What's the outer edge of this? What's the outer section of the circle? Cytosol, yeah. And what's the inner? What's the inner? Like, pretend the yolk is the inner part. Yep. So where does it? This is test question stuff. Where does the world of metabolism occur? Aerobic. Only in the mitochondria. Yep. So that's all that's happening in a sled dog, in a nutshell. Same thing that's happening in a human. But I have a question on this. Back to anatomy, where's stuff coming from? What's the source of the fat? What's the source of fat for the increased plasma free fatty acids? Where's that fat at? Why does the blood actually have more fatty acids in it through time? Where's it coming from?
Is it coming from the liver?
Fat stores. Yeah, that's exactly it. So the body just starts, that's what's happening with the sled dogs too. And on that article they say the increased fat probably comes from a high fat diet. The dogs have fat stores now, and that's where they're drawing from. So, by the way, back to the kind of bashing this a little bit of the nutrition class, which you guys already bashed it for me. Plasma-free fatty acids. Guess what kind of acids those? Guess what kind of fat that is?
Pretty good saturated.
What?
Yeah.
No, what did you
Can't
say?
hear you, Brent.
Saturated.
Oh.
Okay.
Ask it again and then he can answer it.
Free fatty acids in the blood, by definition, are short and medium chain fatty acids. And they're attached to albumin, which is the protein in egg whites. The long chain fatty acids from vegetable oils, polyunsaturated fatty acids, they absorb into the blood, packed in a big beach ball called a chylomicron, which is the first of a series of progressively smaller lipoproteins called LDL, IDL, and HDL. The long chains have to be stored and transported in water, right? Blood. Oil doesn't mix with water. Long chain fatty acids are packed inside of lipoproteins, LDL, HDL. Small chain and short and medium chain fatty acids are always attached as free fatty acids in the bloodstream, connected to albumin, or transported by that. That's the clean burning fuel for your body, for the cells. Okay? So, here's the mitochondria. Here's a capillary, a red blood cell is carrying the O2. Free fatty acids here are going inside here. And a free fatty acid, when it's finally broken down and actually combusted, is acetic acid, vinegar. Put two acetic acids together, you got butyric acid, butter, short chain fatty acid. Put 5 acetic acids together, 2 times 5. You have the fatty acid that's mostly abundant in coconut oil. You eat coconut oil, guess what happens to those fatty acids? They don't get packed in chylomicrons, they don't get packed in LDL or HDL. They get connected to albumin, go straight to your bloodstream, and are consumed instantly. which is why when we die and decompose, back to that death and decomposition, if you read that, and I know Brent did, guess what the most abundant fatty acids they find are in death and decomposition? Long chains only.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. So if the
These are used
medium
up.
and short chain is used up.
Exactly, so you're not going to find them. All right.
Cool.
Ding, ding, ding. Exactly. So, which means, let's go back this way. If a human, when they decompose, or even before they decompose, like we're alive right now, the types of fatty acids that we're mostly made of are the long-chain fatty acids. We're not burning those, that's the structure of the cell membranes. All right? So this extends over into food. What's the most abundant fatty acids in food? It's the long chains. Most plants and animals are made out of long-chain fatty acids. Meaning, now we're coming to the coup de grace here. What's the most difficult type of fat to get in the diet?
Short chain.
Yeah, the most difficult type. It's easy to get long-chain fats because most plants and animals that have fat are made out of long-chain fats. Where do you get short-chain fats? They're difficult to get. Meaning, if you don't consciously make an effort to get short-chain fatty acids, then you won't get enough. So butter, sorry, I have to kill that.
Okay.
Green-eyed lady. So this is the importance of fermentable carbohydrates, by the way. Fermentable carbohydrates break down the short and medium chain fatty acids in the gut. Those acids are the acids protecting against pathogens. Or you could eat those fatty acids directly. How? Butyric acid and dairy fat and coconut oil. Not all the vegetable oils, not even olive oil, not even lard, not grapeseed oil, none of the other oils are going to be rich in short or medium chain fatty acids. There's very, very few sources for them. So directly you eat them as like I said, butter or coconut oil, or indirectly by eating fermentable carbs. Go ahead.
So, what are the fermentable carbs?
Fermentable carbs are, let's focus on what they taste like. We know that simple sugar carbs, like sucrose, glucose, galactose, lactose, all that, they're sweet, right? And we know that starches, which are long chains of glucoses, long, hundreds, right? What do they taste like? Like potatoes. What do they taste like? Starchy and dull. What's in between? Medium sweet tasting things. Berries, onions, Jerusalem, artichokes, chicory root. I stick with the berries. Lentils and split peas also are fermentable.
Did you say lentils?
Lentils, yeah.
Red bean sprouted?
Pinto beans, fibrous carbohydrates, basically.
So,
No, would they be?
legumes, basically. Like, kidney beans, would that also count?
Yeah, and I think things that are fibrous. They're kind of starchy though too,
Okay.
so that you can get combinations of the two. Go ahead.
So, that's really cool about the lentils and the pinto beans. But what about the fermented, like sauerkraut and all that kind of stuff?
So once you ferment something, now what's it made of? Okay.
She said.
Okay. Let's get a visual on this. We need a visual. That's fermentation of cellulose, grass that a cow ate. And that's the rumen of the cow. removed and put on bricks. So once the cellulose, which is sugar, very similar to glucose, 6 carbon molecules, 6 carbon atoms. Once it fermented, then what's the product? Yes. And what are the products in dairy fat? The acids I keep mentioning? Vinegar is what? Acetic acid. And what's the dairy fat acid? Bingo. So why does cow milk and butter have butyric acid? Because the cellulose is fermenting into butyric acid. And once it's fermented, then it's acids, not cellulose. So not the sugars are gone.
So you're saying fermented food just takes the sugars out of it, so it doesn't have to go through that whole process?
Fermented is past tense. It's no longer the sugar. It is now.
Okay, so it's, because you keep saying dairy and all this kind of stuff, but lactose intolerant. So it's like what's that stuff called? Sauerkraut and things that are fermented, good for people who eat. Like I'm going into nutritional ketosis, so I need something like that. So do you suggest something like fermented that's up already? Because I have.
You want to actually have things that aren't fermented yet, that will ferment.
So you want something that will ferment in your gut.
Fermented is past tense.
Also, I don't want it already. So it's just going to be food once it gets in. If I eat fermented, but if I eat something like the lentils or whatever.
Things that are not yet fermented.
What about the potato starch?
That's another example, yes.
So I can just have the potato starch.
Stick with berries, man, and smoothies.
I'm tired of blueberries. That's all I have is.
You know what?
Wild big berries.
Then start going Tex-Mex style, where like pinto beans with rice and beans with not much rice.
You don't need rice to make beans a complete.
That's not what I'm talking about here. You're switching the issue. We're talking about fermentable foods.
Okay.
So,
lentils and pinto beans.
Which we'll cover in more detail. What I'm doing today is without going into the gut flora physiology.
I need the gut flora physiology.
There's a special. Yeah, I know. But you can see how all this is linked now, right? Today, boom, I'm linking up a lot of
and
ideas.
This is where this gets confusing because some will say no, take the beans and the legumes and stuff like that because it's not good for your gut, and then some will say yeah, eat that because it's good for you. So
that depends on the nature of the gut flora.
Didn't the Perfect Health Diet not recommend legumes?
What's his name? Yeah, he's more into the starchy.
Okay.
Eating. Some people are going to be dependent on the gut flora. We'll expand this.
okay.
This is where we're dissecting it. The basic, let's stick with the basic idea today, which is fermentation. Okay?
Okay.
And then when we dissect it, those are the types of questions that we'll dissect it.
Well, then let me take this back to fermentable. I just used that link to just ask a different question. So if berries are fermentable carbohydrates, what about other fruits like bananas?
No.
No? Okay, what's the difference?
But they can, it's the type, I have a schematic for this,
Okay.
where you can see it all on one page. And you go, whoa, that's easy.
No, it's
Do you
not.
have that?
I got that.
I do it, I'll show it to you right
Let's
now.
put it up.
You have that page.
Since we're on this.
that page.
I think so. You can. There.
The secret is
Bam. Check that out.
You gotta put money in the jar.
Is this a familiar, this is what you're centered on. We're back to the anatomy. This is exactly where we started this class today. Stomach, small intestine, colon. Where do the bacteria live? Mostly in the colon, small, latter half of the small intestine.
Right.
These are funnels, which is representing the area in which they absorb into the bloodstream. Let's get a proper view of the bloodstream.
Can we get that?
yeah, can that go on the thing?
Yeah. Not on today's lecture. That'll confuse people that weren't here.
Okay.
Wow, I never have
It snowed out.
I know it.
Maybe it grows in when it snows.
Why do I want to show you? Give me a second. Find this. So you guys can really visualize this. There it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that. Constantly going.
It's gonna take a while to
I want to
show this up.
blow this up and like wrap it all the way around my room.
I have a 10-foot version
You
that's
are?
I'll bring in.
No way.
Yeah.
Not very sure. Up here.
Yeah, way.
I know where we're going.
You don't come.
I have the small version here.
I like
today.
it. You may not think I would want it, but.
You know what you
Goodness.
want to be when you grow up, right?
I gotta extract this into a smaller picture. Ah, there it is. Okay. I just showed you stomach, small intestine, colon, and a little bar diagram. Well, here's actually an illustration of it. It's colored the way I like it colored. All the small vessels that come off the small intestine go to one great vessel. So the nutrients that you eat, when they're broken down into amino acids, glucose, absorb into the portal vein and go to the liver before it even gets into your heart or your bloodstream. So the food you have eaten has not yet gotten into your bloodstream to be pumped out of the heart. Okay? So tell me that does not look the same, by the way, as all the small rivers called tributaries that feed the Mississippi River. So literally, rivers actually carry nutrients from soil and dump it into one big river. It all gets the pollutants too. And that's why deltas are actually fertile areas to grow crops in. Because the nutrients are actually carried by vessels into one great vessel. And that's exactly what the nutrients are doing out of your small intestine, which is the size of a tennis court, when you spread it out. Okay? So now you have that visualized. Go back to that diagram. Now the question is, where along the length of the small intestine do sugars or carbohydrates absorb? Simple sugars, which are 6 carbon atoms long, glucose, fructose, lactose, and the disaccharides, sucrose, lactose, maltose, absorb in the upper half. Fermentable fibers, pectins, inulin, oligofructose, and guarana. These are saccharolytic, meaning sugars that ferment produce, guess what we've been talking about today? Short-chain fatty acids, like the rumen of a cow does. So the fermentation happening here in a cow rumen, in your gut, or in a muscle cell is fermentation. You guys got that down. Here's another thing that's also produced as a result, B vitamins and vitamin K. It's either K1 or K2, I forget which one. Like leafy greens will help produce them. Well, leafy greens have a form of vitamin K, but then some of the fermentable carbs produce the other form of vitamin K. And then you have putrefaction fermentation, which is proteins that are fermenting, and you don't want that type of fermentation. So, back to a health food idea, is protein best eaten cooked or raw? Forget about the safety issues. I'm just talking like how the body uses it. Go back to the whey protein, yeah. This stuff is in dipeptide form, pre-digested, so to speak. It's broken down. That's why a burn victim could benefit. They don't have to work to break it down. They're in a weakened state already.
Is this any protein or just animal protein?
Well, I'm talking about meat. Actually, all protein will denature if you heat it. So the reason why whey protein is ion exchange, it doesn't use heat. It uses electrical ions to extract it. So once you heat protein, the egg white here, which is clear actually without the membrane around it, the membrane is still intact on this, right? This is clear and white. Not clear, but once you denature it, it's white. So all proteins will denature with heat. But the point is this, is that that's why large carnivores, if they eat the meat raw, it wouldn't digest as well, and it would pass down further down into the colon. So if you eat well-cooked meat, you don't absorb it as well, and it goes further down the colon where it tends to putrefy. And another thing, the acids produced by fermentable carbs help protect against putrefaction. The thing is, you don't want a whole lot of putrefaction in the first place. So pick your way of how you want to do it. But basically, medium rare meat is like what I like, because I don't like overcooking the meat. I know what happens. But fortunately, I prefer it that way. So, by the way, oligofructose, that's the berry fruit. It's also in mother's milk. So medium chain or medium length carbohydrates are also medium sweet tasting. And you think about an infant when it's born, its gut, small intestines, aren't populated with bacteria. So how do you populate bacteria? Let's compare it to somebody who just took antibiotics. Antibiotics do what? Kill bacteria. So what's the common condition between a newborn infant and a person who just went through lots of rounds of antibiotics? They're similar. So you have to. Then it's really a good idea to have probiotics, meaning bacteria, so that you seed it, right? But then what do you have to do to the bacteria? Feed them. And that's what the oligofructose does in mother's milk. Mother's milk actually has some bacteria, but then the sugar feeds that bacteria so it populates the gut. And that's why breastfed babies, milk-fed babies are healthier, so to speak, have less immune problems because they populate the gut with a better profile of bacteria compared to cesarean-born or formula-fed babies. Last year, I had two people that were, one student was pregnant, the female, and the other guy's wife was pregnant, so we really talked a lot about this last year. Then there was a little more heightened interest, I think, maybe, I don't know. But you guys want this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, while we're on this, back to oxidative, you don't even see how this right now, but I'll explain how this relates to oxidative aerobic nutrition. Okay, you guys learned today now, oxygen is dissolved in your blood, goes all the way down to the cell level. Oxygen is a gas. People with bad breath, halitosis. You know what the source of the bad breath actually is? Notice. It's gas. Burps are gas coming back up because gas that's produced here can come out as a fart or you can burn it. Right? Okay, this is where it gets gross.
Oh, is that what's gross?
This is worse. All right. Well, you know that oxygen can absorb through your alveoli in your lungs into the capillaries, into the bloodstream. Well, guess what gas can do when it's in your intestines? it can absorb along with amino acids and glucose. So indirect gases absorb through the intestines. People are blowing out the result of bad bacteria with bad breath, for example. People don't eat. You actually said this correctly, Talia. You don't brush teeth, the bacteria start to produce acids, and acids do what to enamel?
Break it down.
Bingo. So, certain bacteria produce certain gases. You actually can absorb those gases. And they time this out to see when is the breath the worst. I forget how it goes exactly. But there's a delay effect where the off-gassing that you blow back out is a result of the gases being formed in the body from bad nutrition, or result of the gas in the intestine being absorbed and then got off-gassed later. So that's what indirect gas is. So you're not just blowing out CO2, by the way. Most of what we blow out is CO2. And by the way, how can you tell? They're actually using gas as a diagnostic tool. Dogs can smell cancerous cells because what comes out of a cell that's cancerous produces different gases. And dogs can 99.9% of the time detect the person that has cancer when they're trained to do it. Machines aren't even as accurate. So now you understand what I'm saying. Like if you look at this, if you look at the body, just what's happening in a cell, you can tell everything that's going on. So I'll email this out to you guys. Back to lecture. I think we killed concept number 2, man. All fat burned in the cell is extracted from the blood. And I already talked about the free fatty acid. Concept 3, fat burns in the cell normally, practically all the time. You're sitting here right now, off-gassing CO2 because fat's burning in your mitochondria. Now we get to the other stuff, looking at the graph. All right, Talia, you're under the gun. Don't anybody answer for her. Like I said, we're always looking at humans from at rest to full speed. So let's just consider the red line. This is the amount of acid being formed. This is the speed or the power of a person. So let's say running, a pretty good clip, not full speed. Right here. Let's say a really good clip like the wolf. You're hauling. What's being formed? What's the acid being formed in the muscle? Only one. There's only one acid formed in the muscle. Bingo. Okay. Now here's the question for y'all. What portion of the graph represent where fat is being burned in the greatest percentage? Not the greatest amount, the greatest percentage. A flat portion. Because there's no acid being formed there. Fat is the primary fuel substrate.
Would you say that over again? You said, what now? Somebody answer the question?
All right. All this graph is showing is acid is being formed in small amounts at rest or moderate levels of exercise, which is the flat portion of the graph.
Oh, that's you saying that's where fatty acid is being formed. Is it?
Not the word fatty acid.
I mean, like that.
Bingo.
Right.
So, which portion of the graph represents where fatty acids are the predominant fuel?
When we're fat.
Exactly.
Okay.
By deduction. But let's talk about the shift in that graph right there. These are the conclusions from everything we talked about. Both dogs and humans. As long as this graph, when they're measuring it in your blood, remains flat, you have not shifted into crazy glycolysis. You're not depleting glycogen. Both dogs and humans burn fat preferentially at rest. And they don't switch over to glycogen until they get way up here. A little bit more about the dogs. I went on to read on forums, dog sled racing forums. So when the dogs metabolically, say the metabolic switch hits, and they start burning more fat, well, they slow down. They can't run as fast. That's why a lot of the mushers start beating the dogs. Because glycogen is the preferred fuel for what type of exercise? Bingo. Because fat can produce power, high power. Alright, here's more of the classic exercise physiology stuff. We'll just rip through this stuff. You guys can read this. This will be like the test. This will be like the type of graph I have on a test or an assignment. What this graph shows is some people maintaining a constant speed. So it's in meters per second. But this is a person maintaining 3.8 meters per second. See what the lactate does? Just remains steady. Increase the speed to 4.0, it remains steady. 4.2 meters per second, steady. And then 4.4. Boom. What happened? Crazy glycolysis, you could say. This is what forces you to slow down. And this is called the maximum lactate level steady state. Meaning it's the maximum speed a person can perform and keep a steady lactic acid. Any faster, boom, it spikes the lactic acid. That's why you fail at lifting weight for, say, 15 to 20 reps, or even 30 or 40 reps. If you do anything fast, right? Let's make sense of this. And when we go down to the gym in 2 weeks, by the way, not next week, I'll have you guys form into groups so you can put this into a practical. So I'll ask Andrea. Let's say that running 4.4 meters per second is something that causes you to run, let's say, in a 1,500 meter race. That's your speed.
Okay.
That's a race that's over in 4 minutes. Am I right on that? Can I see that? Let me double check. I am right. Wow. If you look at the events, short distance events, 40 meter dash, 60 meter dash, you get up to the 1,500 meter run here, that's a 4 minute race. All the winners are around 4 minutes. Anything over 4 minutes, the pace dramatically slows. Take a look at this. You guys don't have books. What up? Get your book out. Share a book. Make sure you can see this. Less than 25. We'll start a mark on top. Yeah, let's get your head in there. Sit next to the play.
Here's like 25.
Actually, that's good. 4 minute race. Okay, by the way, these are paces of winning times I have here. Alright, how long is a 100 meter dash for Usain Bolt? 9.27 seconds. I think it's 9.27. Get the idea? So the pace slows dramatically. If you, for all races that are over, glycogen depletion is highest in the red and yellow zones. So that, back to Andrea, that 4.2 meter per second speed right there would conform to where on that graph? Below that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she sped up to the 1500 meter pace. This is what you'd see. Is the lactic acid with this spike. And lactic acid spiking is a reflection of which fuel suddenly being used way more. Glycogen. Yeah. Get that, Leah?
No, I was looking.
Sorry.
What?
Which line here is, this is lactic acid forming. Which line represents this one or that one? More glycogen being wasted.
You want to talk about?
Yeah. I'm just reviewing this for you because you missed last. So I'm just drilling it back in your head. All right, you guys got that. Whenever you see these graphs, by the way, this could be a multiple choice question. Just like, I always give examples when I'm testing. This part of the graph could be expressed these ways: speed, power, VO2 max, or loosely just intensity, or just images do the same thing. Now let's get to something really cool. I think you guys like this. And for you, Brent, if you push this here button, it takes you right here to the study.
All this reading, I'm so excited.
But this is the graph, where I got the graph. Okay. Up to this point, we've talked about the percentage of fat burned at rest moderate levels is higher. Question, I've never shown you this graph. It's hard. I just got lucky and stumbled upon this a few years ago. Where is the maximum amount of fat burned and when? That's what this shows. Check it out. When you hit about 50% of VO2 max, and you increase speed, and you keep increasing speed, all the way up to about 70, even past 70% of VO2 max, the absolute amount of fat burning remains fairly constant, within 10%. Let's see how well your critical thinking is here. What does this represent, this drop? Okay, a person is increasing speed.
Then you're switching to the glycogen.
And keep increasing speed. What speed would this be? What's the fastest possible speed?
Fast.
Sprinting. Boom. Right. So the only reason you're seeing the absolute amount of fat dropping, that's an illusion. What do I mean by that? Oops. I didn't want to push the back button. There we go. I explain it here. That's the analysis. I'll use my mouth so I don't read. Okay. Performing, the muscles that are doing the performing at a high speed, they're the ones producing the acid. And so when you prick somebody's finger, take an acid reading, that acid is from the muscles that are working, correct? Meanwhile, what was your brain doing the entire time? Metabolically speaking.
So what was it doing?
Which organ in the body or which body part uses the most oxygen? Right. Yep. So did the brain stop using oxygen? How about other parts of the body not doing anything? Yeah. oxygen is still being consumed. What that actually is a apparent decline in fat being not used. But how long do these types of events last? Less than 4 minutes, all of them. That's why I showed you that graph. That's why I made that graph. That colorful rainbow graph. All those events last less than 4 minutes.
4 minutes, so then you stop. Is that when you switch to the glycogen versus the fat?
Yep. And anything over those paces are producing a ton of acid. So what do you have to do to maintain speed? To maintain any speed, you have to slow down. You have to slow down.
You know, I'm wondering if this is the basis for the Tabata. Tabata cycle is 4 minutes, right? And then you're supposed to rest 90 seconds and then you start another Tabata cycle.
And what is the Tabata high intensity output?
Well, it's 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. It's 8 rounds of 20, 10, 20, 10, so a total of 4 minutes. And then in between, so a real Tabata has 8 Tabata cycles, but in between each cycle, you're supposed to rest for like 9 minutes. But even during the Tabata round, you have the 10 seconds.
It's a
rest.
form of interval change.
Right.
Hold those thoughts. We're going to come back to them. Because you're jumping ahead.
Okay.
Basically, you just have to slow down to maintain speed, pace speed. Otherwise, you're not going to run a fast race. Running fast races are short because
You can maintain speed.
yeah,
You can run fast.
the only way to produce it is to produce a ton of acid. The only way to produce a ton of speed is to produce a ton of acid, which then makes you slow down. The only way to maintain a steady state for a long period of time is to be right at the threshold. But the threshold changes. That's what's coming up. All right?
Okay.
But before we get to that next part, so here's the entire picture of exercise physiology on one graph now. Fat usage is really high, percentage-wise, never really at 100, whoever made this graph, but it gets the idea across. It drops. This curve resembles what? The glycogen being used. Same thing as the one with the bread going up. It also resembles the lactate being produced because they're the same events. So in this region, you're getting a mixture of fat and carbs. Let's get to something a little more interesting diet-wise. Go back to that fat graph. Here a person hasn't reached lactate threshold. They're probably just about at it, and now they're at their lactate threshold, and any faster, certainly the faster. Glycogen is being depleted like crazy right here. Over here, it's not. Diet-wise, this is what this means. You can be running up near your threshold, but you're not depleting the glycogen at a great rate, so you don't need as much glycogen as a person who's actually running above threshold interval-wise. Coming back to you. So if you're jamming for 4 minutes, certainly you're above threshold, and all of a sudden you're like, I can't maintain this pace, I gotta slow down. So you take that break for what, a minute, 30 seconds, whatever it is, right? But then you repeat it, then you're just doing everything you can to maximize glycogen production. And you're pretty much near, if you're in this zone, you're still burning a ton of fat, but you're really taking your glycogen levels down as fast as you possibly can. That's what that is. And the other analogous thing would be, what's the 50-second race? What's something that lasts 50 seconds on there? Oh yeah, thanks. So, what are the main muscles being used in a 400-meter run? Yeah, quads, hamstrings, legs. 50 seconds. That'd be about the same as doing about maybe 20 reps on a heavy leg press to failure, wouldn't it? Sound reasonable? I'm just, ballpark. So what's the difference between 20 sets of leg presses with a, meaning you got a fairly heavy weight, you do 20 reps to failure, and you go, God, I can't, you got to stop, right? What's the difference between that and the 400-meter run? Pretty much nothing, which is something approaching interval training. It's all interval training. If you're sprinting like crazy for anywhere from 50 seconds to 4 minutes, all it is super duper high sustained glycogen depletion. And that's why I think I wrote glycogen depletion is highest here. Yeah, it is. From that 4-minute zone down to about 10 seconds. Here's something I haven't talked about. I didn't plan on talking about today, but it's good to see it today. And I'll end up talking about it again. You guys don't really know why glycogen is depleted yet. At those rates, or at those high speeds. Here I just spent the time to say, running here and to the left wouldn't deplete a lot of glycogen. Even though glycogen depletion is fairly high, but nowhere near over here. Why is it that the lactic acid goes exponential? I mean, it's not just like suddenly it's not like it's a nice steady rise. It just goes up. What's causing that?
When you switch from anaerobic to aerobic?
You're still doing a small amount of anaerobic, even at a moderate level. It's just that fat is producing, that most of it is aerobic at moderate levels.
Because couldn't you also burn some glucose in the mitochondria aerobic?
Yes, and I purposely avoided that.
Oh.
But that's not
You
what I'm,
avoided everything.
that's not what I'm after. I'll show you what I'm after.
It's because the fat is burning at a higher intensity.
This is the good stuff. Then we'll take a little, might take a little break after. Let me get a little light on this. Where does aerobic metabolism occur?
Aerobic, did you say?
Where?
Mitochondria.
Let's say this is glucose. And fat can go in here too. Fat can only burn in a mitochondria. Glucose can ferment here, which we know. However, glucose can also oxidize. This is where it gets interesting. Simple math. Take one glucose molecule, and if it's fermented, you get 2 ATPs. Take one glucose molecule, and if it's combusted in the mitochondria, you get 38 ATPs. However, that's slow. You cannot produce power by burning. You don't produce high-speed power by combusting glucose. You only produce power, high-speed power, one way and one way only. And what is it? We talked about it over redundantly. Fermentation. So in order to produce the same amount of power, how many of these do you have to burn? Or, I'm using the wrong word, ferment.
One.
14?
No, wait, I'm sorry. Say that again, in order to,
Not more than 16. 18. 37. Answer the life, the universe, and everything.
2 times 19 equals 38. Meaning you're using 19 times the amount of glycogen or glucose to produce the same amount of power in an unadapted human cell. Meaning the out-of-shape person is somebody that basically has to resort to fermentation to produce the equivalent power that a trained, adapted cell would. The adapted cell has a larger mitochondria, a bigger firebox, so you don't waste the glucose. You can still, so glucose is used 2 ways. I've kept that away from you guys until today. It's a hybrid fuel. But what you never, almost ever hear about is you waste glucose like crazy if you go above your lactate threshold. The funny thing is, even though this only produces 2 ATPs compared to 38, it happens at lightning speed. It's happening so fast, like piranha fish, blah, 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 right? It still produces way more power than burning it would, as far as power output, as far as the muscles are concerned. So, almost, in my opinion, most of the teachers always say, well, almost all the books say this. They slant it so like it's a better thing that glucose, when it's used aerobically, produces more ATP. So what? It ain't making you go fast. And they lose the lesson by connecting it to the food. In fact, open up any book and go to most of the time. In fact, I'll show you some other examples. They start people out by looking at ATP. Metabolism and physiology, they start with ATP, which is, you'll never understand ATP anyway. I don't understand ATP. Adenosine triphosphate, I know what it is. But you know what more of a practical way to understand ATP is? It's based on what it's made out of. Phosphorus. There's red phosphorus and white phosphorus. And they're explosive. I think the red phosphorus is unstable. Guess what happens when you expose it to air? Oxygen. All right? We're talking about speed of burning now. This is pretty simple. If I take a match out, strike it, I should have brought one today. How long does the explosive part burn? How long?
Half a second.
Maybe a couple seconds. Or even less. And then, what burns slowly? What's the stick made out of? Carbon atoms. Okay, it's combustion, right? What do I have written at the top of this? On a 40-meter dash or a 100-meter dash. What's actually being used for a 40-meter dash? No? Yeah. A snap, super freaking fast burst out of the blocks, or just leaping, high jumping, just a quick snap. Where's that power coming from? It's the ATP in the muscle. What I've boiled everything down to is basically fat. Well, I haven't said this, but the fuel substrate is fat or carbs. All that produces ATP. But by talking about it with regard to ATP has no bearing on food. The way I've handled this was like I connected it all to food, down to the cell. And then I cover the ATP after I get to the cell. Rather than talk about ATP first. I just don't do it that way. But what I wanted you to see was this. You waste 19 times more glucose. Meaning, let's put this in a practical form. If you're the type of person that does pretty fairly high intensity exercise underneath lactate threshold, so you're not wasting ATP. Wasting glucose, I should say. Do you need a higher carb or lower carb diet?
Lower carb.
Relatively lower, right. And yet, here's what people won't understand. You could be a person that, like, this is how I eat. I'm just kind of letting you know where I do it myself now. I don't train at I don't try to maintain sustained super high intensity because there's not a whole lot of difference in the intensity between 4.2 meters per second and 4.4. So what coaches are doing with athletes, they don't want them to waste their glycogen levels in long distance races. They want them to train or perform at that steady lactate level. Because then you don't run out of gas, more or less. But your carb intake doesn't have to be as high if you're doing this other type of training that you're talking about. So this is where we're just slicing and dicing it now. That makes sense? Any questions on that? All right.
So are you saying then with that high intensity interval, because there is that break there, so that would be, you would eat more like a low carb diet?
Doing what? Repeat the actual
The
condition.
high intensity interval with the rest,
So describe the whole numbers again.
4 minutes, or 20 on 10 seconds off.
So 4 minutes of just jamming with,
Well, no, 20, you're on for 20 seconds, and then you rest for 10, then you're on again for 4 minutes.
on for 20 seconds. At what level?
It can be at a high level, it can be at a low level.
Is that 20 seconds at a higher level than the 4 minutes?
It's 4 minutes altogether.
Or 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a 4 minute chunk. You do 20 seconds of high intensity exercise followed by 10 seconds of rest. Repeat that 8 times, makes
Got it.
4 minutes.
Got it. That's just, you know what that sounds like? Strength training. Think about that. You perform a heavy lift, and how long does a heavy lift last? For 6 reps. Thank you. and then you do nothing for a little bit, go on to another exercise if you want to without any rest, and you do another set of reps for, like, say 6 to 10 reps, which lasts maybe 20 seconds. See how this is just the same thing, man. All it is,
I see what you mean.
yeah.
It's kind of like,
Which is why Ray Peat says this. A lot of,
so now we're back to
how many people tell me this? When you describe a class that does this, how many people, average person, might perceive this type of class as an aerobic class?
weight loss. What do you mean exactly? How many people?
I'm not talking about the number of people. I'm just saying, generally speaking, the perception of a lot of people, when you get people on spin bikes, by the way, what type of equipment does this occur on?
You do it anyway.
AD.
Exactly. But a spin bike would be a good one, a good example of it, right? All right. Put a bunch of spin bikes in a room. What type of exercise do people generally think they're doing?
Cardio.
Yep. And what type? Aerobic or anaerobic?
Aerobic.
Exactly. But what type of exercise are they really doing?
I don't know.
Exactly. Most people never correctly understand aerobic exercise, ever, or anaerobic. They think getting people in a room and jamming on them is aerobic exercise. No, it's not. It's anaerobic. Thank you for nodding. So, Yeah. Putting this all together, let's check this out. So
I'm not going to body.
I'll wait for you. I'm waiting for you, Alex. It's all right. So this is the adaptation that occurs as far as the graph goes. An out-of-shape person will start spiking lactic acid earlier. They waste glycogen. The adapted person doesn't shift into glycolysis at a lower intensity. It happens later. So they're continuing to oxidize a greater amount of fat and not wasting glycogen. That's called the lactate shift. And often you'll see the word spare glycogen attached to that. If you're not wasting it, you're sparing it. Now the next step, I want to take this visual again in a different way. Okay? We visualized it with the graph. Well, let's just visualize it like for what it really is. That's Antoine Lavoisier collecting carbon dioxide. This guy's breathing into a vessel, and he's collecting CO2. So that's the beginning of modern medical physiology, you could say, right there, and nutrition. Very shortly after that, they figured out what was burning and combusting in the young. But now we have a whole new graph you guys have never seen. Now this will test you out again. Like, what the hell is happening? Excuse my French. Okay. You're at idle right now, right? You're breathing in oxygen, blowing out CO2. All right, so oxygen consumption is low, right? What happens as you speed up? It goes up. And then it flattens out. That's what VO2 max is. Most people don't think of VO2 max this way. I don't even like to talk about VO2 max. I like to talk about oxygen consumption because it's just, what is it? Oxygen is dissolved in your blood, goes into the cell, it burns, you blow out CO2. Question, critical thinking. Mary, pick on you. Okay, this is exercise intensity. Once you reach VO2 max, can you speed up? Don't anybody answer this.
Can you speed up?
Yep. Let's just pretend this is you. This is what we graphed. Here you are right now. You're sitting, O2 consumption is low. We get you on a treadmill. We progressively speed you up. You get to that point where we're measuring no more oxygen is being consumed. But you're running fairly fast now. You're chucking. Can you speed up?
Let's guess. You could.
And why?
Okay.
How are you going to...
Oh, one question.
And so the question now is, if you can, don't anybody answer this, how are you going to produce the power to speed up? Do you know, Andrea?
No.
Well, what have we been talking about for 4 weeks? What kind of metabolism until today? Anaerobic,
Anaerobic, yeah.
right? And what molecule is wasted like crazy to produce power? Yeah.
Yes.
Which is anaerobic.
And yes.
Well, this is aerobic. And so who cares if you have oxygen? Can you sprint without breathing?
Yes.
So what point of the lactate graph would correspond with this? The lactate graph goes here, right? And then it starts to go up, and then wham. And guess what? You can speed up, but that's when you start wasting glycogen right here. You don't need to breathe. Your cells don't need to breathe. They can be cut off. Back to the idea of, if I take a tourniquet, cut off my blood supply, or if I get shot, right? Like Jack, what was his name again? guy that shot JFK.
Oh,
Lee Harvey Oswald.
yeah.
So what's the difference between very high running levels towards approaching sprinting, a tourniquet on the leg cutting off all blood flow, or no blood flow because you got shot and severed an artery? What do the cells have to do to produce energy? Anaerobic. So VO2 max ain't no big deal. That doesn't make a person run faster. World-class sprinters can have kind of a low VO2 max. They don't need a high VO2 max. It's the bacterial section of the cell fermenting. And a horse does, look at a horse, does the same thing as a human. Speed it up. Oxygen consumption increases, then it flattens out. Boom, VO2 max. It can still run faster if it wants to. So concept 11, I'll read this one. Increasing speed past VO2 max is possible for all humans, including couch potatoes, simply because fermentation of glucose provides the power. And then here's a kind of a better thought from that. Lance Armstrong's coach said this. Anybody can, this was when Armstrong was still like loved by everybody. Anybody can produce even more power than Lance can compared to his race pace speed, even when he's hammering. I mean, when he's at pace speed. Why can an average everyday Joe off the street produce more power? At any moment. Why? It's the same thing I've been talking about. It's fermenting. It's fermentation. You can, as an out-of-shape person, hammer for a good 20 to 30 seconds, but you can't sustain it like the athlete can because their mitochondria are bigger. So they'll get up to near the threshold level and just hang there or a little above it, hang there, just pound on it, where somebody out of shape won't be able to pound on it, but won't be able to sustain it. But if they want to produce the power for a moment, or 20 seconds, they can do it. So, what's the stimulus to cause the adaptation?
Yeah, that's my question.
Right. How do you, because...
Training at, here it is. It's training near, at, or above what? Lactate threshold. Take an out-of-shape person, they're on their bike, you're having them spin their legs, they're like, oh, I feel a muscle burn, right? 2 months later, what are they feeling at the same intensity? Nothing. Why? The mitochondria have adapted. They got greater density of mitochondria. They're not producing acid. So instead of wasting carbs, glucose, glycogen, they're using more what?
So initially, you will waste until you've adapted, and then you just keep going.
You can keep increasing the threshold, your ability to hold a high intensity. But no matter what, whether you're trained or untrained, everybody can exceed their capacity. But once you start hammering, it doesn't matter who you are. So, like even couch potatoes can produce the power on a bike or a rowing machine even faster than the race pace of athletes. Race pace isn't all out.
So, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So, by increasing your threshold, meaning that you're just kind of delaying when you are wasting?
Perfectly said.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep, you're delaying it. Later, into higher intensities. Yep. So, the dog starts extracting more fat out of the bloodstream simply because a metabolic switch is really describing the ability for the cell itself to not perform glycolysis. Duh, because if it was performing glycolysis, it would be wasting its glycogen. So the only answer for it to be able to not waste its glycogen, if they're looking at it and go, wow, their glycogen stores are high, well, then there's only one other alternative. It had to be burning more fat to produce the energy. But what they didn't get into that article, I just dove even further, is that a lot of these mushers start beating up on their dogs, forcing them. Because some dogs are, some of the dogs, just like humans, probably have higher VO2 maxes, meaning they have a higher lactate threshold, where those dogs can probably keep the pace, but the dog with not as good as endurance fitness start lagging and are forced to run the pace of the other dogs anyway. And now those are the dogs that are suffering. So after I read that, I'm against that now. Forcing dogs to have to run like that, that's actually cruel.
So then, by you delaying the wasting of glucose, so increasing your threshold, thereby increasing your VO2 max, whatever. So then, during that period, so then you are burning more fat. That's what you're saying.
Yep. So anybody who's in shape continues to burn fat at higher levels compared to the non-in shape, the untrained person. Which is why you see the graph. Now let's get the detail of that graph. Detrained, current status, improved fitness. This stuff slides back and forth quick. 3 days of no endurance activity for those muscle cells, you see a decrease of mitochondrial enzymes, the density of mitochondria. Just a few days off.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where does the, you have to rest come into play in this?
I mean, that's how plastic it is. It's probably a negligible amount concerning performance as far as that decrease, but that's how plastic when I say plastic, I mean how quickly it changes. I mean, things are fast in the human body. I think we're starting to get an appreciation of quickly things happen. Back to bulletproof coffee, which is adding coconut oil and butter.
Your coffee?
Yeah.
What is
Popular on the West Coast.
Super good. It's really good.
And it's
Full fat, pure
Do they
whole
have
butter,
that here?
and you mix it in a blender and it makes it frothy like a latte. You get some, it's really good.
Or can you buy it where?
I just don't like coffee, that's why I don't.
no, man. You
you
brew
make
your coffee and add butter and a little bit of coconut oil.
It's good.
No, what kind?
Some coffee shops, only a couple of them here are doing it. I know Urban Bean is doing it. They were in the paper a couple months ago. But this has been popular on the West Coast for a few years. Here's what I'm after. A woman asked me a couple weeks ago about this. She goes, how quickly does it work really for the brain to get a lift from that? And I know if I just said, yeah, it does, well, why believe me? So let's use here's a technique I use a lot. Let's use your own experience. I asked her, have you not ever had let's just pretend that you've had an empty stomach and a shot of whiskey, or a shot.
Oh.
That's great.
How quickly do you feel it? How do you feel the effect hit your head? It's fast, man. The size of a tennis court just absorbed all that. Boom, bam, bloodstream, head. Okay? Now you have an appreciation for the short and medium chain fatty acids of what I'm talking about with fat. This is why a biochemist I read once said, essentially, short and medium chain fatty acids are instant fuel for babies. He could have said it for anybody, yeah, and for all humans. That's why you don't find it in a decayed, decomposed body. That stuff is being burned instantly. So when you just put the butyric acid, butter, and coconut oil in coffee, that stuff hits your system, boom, it's in the brain fast. And all your cells. By the way, the main fuel for your liver is saturated fat. Where do the nutrients go first?
Liver.
Bingo. What does the liver need? Energy now. Saturated fat, actually Paul Jaminet wrote about this too. He knows this. That small chain fatty acids, saturated ones, protect the liver against alcohol. Because it's fuel for what? The liver. Now the liver can do its work, so to speak. It's actually protective.
So, acetic acid is simpler than butyric acid, right?
Yes.
Okay, so would acetic acid also be a source of quick fat energy for you?
Of course. And that's what your colon cells run on.
So the people that are drinking that pickle juice, getting the acetic acid, that's quick energy that's going to help them.
That's my theory.
Yeah.
That's a plausible, workable theory. And they were looking at what, remember? Salt and water. No, idiots, it's the vinegar.
That's why some people will drink cider vinegar. I've heard of that. Some people will just drink it.
It's been a health tonic for eons. It's antimicrobial. Or people might just get a little bit of a lift from it.
Right. So how much of that? Can you imagine?
You know what? You're better off getting some of the medium chains. Because that stuff, you don't want it to just be jamming down in the acid direct like that. But that's why then you start adding more variety of food. Okay? Meaning like coconut oil, all the oils and fat, all the good oils and fats. Which will be coconut oil, butter, olive oil. I don't mind eating things that are polyunsaturated like avocados and nuts. But you'll avoid almost all the damage this way. No vegetable oils. Forget about flax and canola oil junk. Okay?
What about flaxseed?
Even those can get rancid. Flaxseed is not as good as everything else I just mentioned. Okay? It's not concentrated anymore. It's okay. But here's the number one thing. Attached to all that, vitamin E is super important to protect against the rancid E. Yeah. So you keep your vitamin E status up. Because back to gas physiology, by the way, off-gassing. When you have fish oil direct, that when it starts to combust and produce the free radical chain reactions, I think I mentioned this, the gases produce ethane and pentane. You can just see you can measure the off gas. So whatever we put in our body, basically, metabolism is the cell respiring. So I actually want to pound that into your heads today, which is why I said down here, concept 12, last concept of the day. Oxygen consumed in a cell is respiration. That's why I asked that trick question early on. Can a fetus, or doesn't, the trick question is, how does a fetus breathe? Talea.
How does it breathe?
How does a fetus breathe? It's a loaded question.
How did you just ask? You asked how does a chick any get oxygen? Did you say how fetus breathe? Through the umbilical cord?
It's the same way you and I breathe. Because I'm not talking about breath breathing with the lungs.
Oh.
I'm talking about breathing as far as what is respiration. What is respiration? It's the exchange of oxygen into the cell and CO2 out. So, concept 12 for one sentence. Respiration is combustion of fuel in the mitochondria. The basic formula for the metabolism, aerobic, is the rule of fire. Fuel plus O2. So if I ask a question like, let me ask you this question now. What are the 4 basic products of metabolism, aerobic and anaerobic? 4 basic products. Things produced.
Energy.
Well, heat is a form of energy.
Are we looking for things
But the
like
four
lactic
basic products.
acid, CO2,
3 of them are listed right there. What's the one I didn't list?
H2O, lactic acid?
Okay, which ones are the products? Let's slow down. Those are products. Those are the reactants. We can talk about rocket science. Reactants are products. You actually said it. But hold it. What's the 4th product not listed here? This is respiration, is combustion, right? That's aerobic metabolism. Those are the 3 products. But remember I said there's 4 products. What's the 4th product? We've talked about it for 4 weeks.
The acid.
Lactic acid. So that's it. You've mastered physiology. Really, seriously. 4 products. And it happens where? In 2 spaces. Think about this. How much shorter could a book be written if you could quickly get people's heads to go, forget about everything you know. Everything that happens metabolically with nutrition, science of medicine, is looking at cells. But let's look at only one cell. One cell, everybody. So, and then you're only looking at the same thing over and over. So if I start talking about your pancreatic cells, your brain cells, the only thing we've been talking about is muscle cells, because the muscle cells are the master cell that makes this easy to understand. And the reason why is it's based on your experience. You've ran, you've walked, you've cried, you've hurt. If you connected to people's experience, like the woman, hey, you had a shot of whiskey, how fast did that hit your head? Then she had no doubt in her mind after I said, hey, the fatty acids. She had no doubt in her mind after I showed her this. I showed you guys this before. There's acetic acid. There's ethanol, alcohol. Alcohol we feel in a few seconds. So butyric acid from butter and coconut oil, which break down the acetic acid like pronto, it's going to hit your head fast too. Then she didn't have to believe my word and take my word for it. Her own experience told her that was the truth. Let's take a break. 15 minutes.
As long as we're going on break, I want to ask you a question then. Okay, so a lot of, I ask a lot of questions, I apologize. A lot of people will tell you to have some carbohydrates in the morning because your brain's firmly associated with glucose. So, what's
Yeah, you've lost some of your glycogen is depleted a little bit.
Yeah. Is it worthwhile? Is it one or the other? Is it both? For as far as the acetic and the butyric acid or the glucose, which one do you want?
Both.
Just both?
You actually want both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did you say, Brent? Glucose and what?
Well, because a lot of people, like you've heard people
Right,
say,
right.
you have glucose for your brain.
Right.
And I was asking, do you want one or the other? And you said both.
Both what though? Glucose and what?
And like the fatty acids, like we mentioned.
Okay, so you said the liver eats the saturated fat, right? Now, the brain is,
Wait a minute. All cells of the body.
right, no, I mean, but it needs
But the liver-
saturated fat to work and, right?
The liver needs, its fuel is the acetic acid.
Now, for your brain, it's glucose, yes?
Not only actually the brain can run on ketone bodies. You were talking about that.
Right. But that is not preferred though, right? To be on ketosis?
Well,
Ready to take.
the ketones won't even be there when you're not in ketosis. But glucose is the normally used fuel for the brain. Which is then not producing acid, by the way. I mean, that's respiration. Because glucose does. Glucose is the hybrid fuel substrate. You can either ferment it or it can be
Right,
combusted.
right, so in the brain it's not combusted.
Yeah, it is
Oh,
because
I'm sorry, it's only combusted and not fermented.
I'm pretty sure we're using some fatty acids in the brain as fuel. I know there is, and a lot. Like you still see a lot of the books say glucose is the only fuel for the brain.
Right,
No,
right.
it's not.
It's not.
No, even the ketone bodies are used.
Huh.
Other than that, right?
That's why epileptic people are put on ketosis.
Right, right, but then for people with diabetes, right, you don't want them in ketone.
Right.
Ketone, I mean, you don't want them producing that ketone.
Right. So you don't undercarb them. You make sure they get enough carbs.
I hear a lot of people trying to go on like these ketosis diets in terms of weight loss, which obviously would be because the glycogen depletion, you're losing water weight. But
You slow the thyroid down, metabolism slows. You don't want to pull on.
so yeah, because I was having discussions with people about they were trying to go on these like long-term ketosis diets, and then maybe like once every 2 months have a day where they eat a bunch of carbohydrates. And it was my opinion that that's not a good strategy for health, weight loss, muscle gain.
It's not, especially popular with the paleo people. They have a limited shelf life on their
Well, because like some of them
practice. So a lot of people are going to end up getting work in the long run. They're going to have problems.
Well, yeah, I was, because that's a lot of, protein and stuff that they're eating.
They're not eating fiber or anything like that either, so there's
Right.
nothing but meat and fat.
Right.
They got there's a lot of problems coming up.
Like if I don't eat
And they don't wanna
at
do,
least 100 grams.
yeah, fiber, whole grains, legumes, like all, that's why I was asking about whole grains, are whole grains all the same?
No.
Right, because I mean, in some articles, they would say like the quinoa or the amaranth or whatever is better.
Oatmeal, people tell me not to eat oatmeal.
You know, you started telling us
You get
what you eat,
You
but
get
then
into
you
then you get into lectins and gluten. Lectins are another thing that are not good.
But it's full of pectin and stuff like that. Isn't that good? Isn't that a fermentable carbohydrate?
Pectin is not. Yeah, it's different.
So what do you eat? You started telling us and then you stopped. I
What was your
don't eat
breakfast this morning?
your salsa.
I had you know what? I had right before I came here. I had 3 poached eggs.
A what?
3 poached eggs
OJ?
with some of this. I think some of this pineapple and.
That's just pineapple, onions, and cilantro, right?
In here?
Yeah, you don't put any vinegar or anything on it, oil.
And I actually just had a little bowl of cereal.
Oh, you do
With,
eat cereal?
Yeah, I'll eat cereal sometimes for just something in the gut. Fast snack. I'll be hungry in an hour.
I was at something.
Right, and so what kind of cereal do you?
I've never gone on like.
I had a raisin. It was a raisin bran, kashi type raisin bran cereal with. I used my water down half and half because I was out of milk. But we're gonna have to be poached eggs and a tangerine, and then I had here whey protein, some more protein and carbs and fat all in one. Really.
So you drink whole milk then?
Yeah.
Versus skim?
Oh, I never do skim ever. Never. I'll write down what I eat for.
What do you think about soy milk?
I'm gonna do that with cereal.
Soy's garbage.
Is it,
You're eating a highly processed product.
even if they say it's not GMO, doesn't matter?
Yeah, I'll kill soy. Don't worry about it.
What about almond milk, John? Would that be a little less processed? I mean, if
All
you're
that
lactose
fake milk
intolerant,
stuff is.
what
So
if
you're
you're
better
lactose
off
intolerant and you really want a milk substitute? What's your best option?
I haven't looked into the almond milk.
Yeah.
Of protein?
No, well,
Then you have to go for some option. That's what people do. They want milk still, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because I can't drink milk. Yeah.
you look at,
Right.
So,
You know, some people that are lactose intolerant are able to tolerate raw milk.
oh.
But it's, you know, it's hard to find raw milk here. It's illegal, but there's places that have drop-off sites.
What about goat milk?
It's another form of decent milk, really, but
Actually,
goaty, of course.
Goatee.
so like,
I don't like goat milk. I've tried it.
you're welcome to email me those.
I like goat cheese.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the goat cheese doesn't taste like goat milk. It tastes like cow. It's close enough to cow.
So we're down for
So-
cheese then, right?
Cheese.
Because I hear a lot of good things about cheese. I'm just kind of scared that I'm going to hear you say, no, cheese.
No, cheese is
straight
good.
up cow.
You know what? You're seeing more and more pro studies come out now on fat, dairy fat, and milk.
Yeah.
Like the Swedish one that just came out, cheese.
Like, I don't have to cook the steak.
Dairy's good, man. It's
So
nutrient
when
dense.
you're talking about dairy, don't go low fat or fat free.
Correct.
Go for the real thing.
Go for the
So if you're lactose intolerant, so can you do?
No, you're still gonna get the lactose.
Even if it's lactose free.
Oh, if it says lactose free, then no.
Obviously, I'm still here.
But I'm saying high fat or low fat don't matter.
Right.
What if you have like a slight lactose intolerance and you have really fatty milk when that's slowly going down to lactose, maybe it'd be okay?
Well, it should slow the absorption down, but I don't know if that'll happen. I think it'll still. The bacteria in that.
No, because there are some people that are just like slightly intolerant. Not just like they just can't absolutely can't have it, but it is.
I think there's a product for that, lactate product or something.
Yeah. How does it just
It's all
break
right
down?
there, baby.
The enzyme is breaks down.
In your Snapchat, she's
Was it you that posted that study where they followed people for a really long time and they just told them to have
High fat diet versus whatever else they were normally eating, high fat people lost several pounds.
I might have referred to something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
Did you read nutrition?
Is that just because they are eating the fuel substance that's more meaningful for them to eat because they're not putting a bunch of carbohydrates?
Pretty much.
Okay. So then the idea of just pure calories in, calories out
I know I
in terms of the food that you're eating is bullshit.
It's bullshit.
Okay.
It is bullshit.
Now the thing that I'm curious about, okay, so follow me on this, I'm just gonna do a couple steps. This has been my thought on it the whole time. So if you, let's say you are burning mostly fat, but you eat a bunch of carbohydrates. So eat those carbohydrates, those carbohydrates
I'm reading.
have to be processed by your body and then they end up getting turned into fat, right?
Correct.
And then that fat has to go into your cells and then be
That was the
used
first book I was gonna read.
as fuel at that point.
And then
So there's a lot of
it's-
exchanging going on and chemical changes.
Or the triglyceride in the
Right, it's just like what he's
LDL
saying,
and the
yeah,
triglyceride
yeah.
count goes up. It's extra carried in the blood.
So it would cost energy though to do that, right? So wouldn't it be wasting energy to eat sugar, then convert it into fat, and then burn it into fat?
two different exercises.
Yeah.
The amount of,
But if you're only looking at.
it's still an energy surplus when that glucose is being converted to
Right,
fat.
so all
Okay,
of these.
but if you eat,
I think people are going to buy
2,000 calories,
because they like the
and a lot of it's fat or a lot of it's glucose.
Right,
even though they might not know that it's really good.
So you do that over a long period of time. I was just under the assumption that even if you're eating a lot of glucose in that 2,000 calorie diet,
so then.
it's gonna end up getting turned into fat and you're just gonna end up burning the fat, right? So why is it different?
It depends. Some people are gonna spike. That's where you get differentiation between people. Some people, like about a third of the population, are gonna excess insulin levels and stay in storage and not burn fat and shut their metabolism down, so they just get fat.
Okay.
And they waste less heat. I'll get it. That's what I'm worried about.
That's what I was saying. So
I wouldn't
You
mind
just
going
say the
over
weight
that one is.
per area.
Write that. Whatever your next comment on it.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Since I have this agreement with this person that does body pump with me, I'm just going to skip body pump and do my own regimen and get the same results of which I probably won't finish myself.
Your sister from.
No.
didn't say anything that we wouldn't learn, we should,
want to create something.
I'm really cool.
What I know.
I want to know
And the
what
way that I work, even if my Kabbalah or
That
for
guy's rich.
temple, right?
You have,
Do you change what you eat per,
That's awesome.
Right,
you do
depending,
it?
yes.
Oh,
And
that takes a lot of prep.
I'm still not,
Kudos to that.
yeah, I mean, every day I think about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
He writes
That's
for
sweet.
I am still
the
not,
History
That's
Channel
what-
magazine.
I'm still not changing my mind. So there is still something.
Something that.
I'm thinking of overly stress.
What?
Yeah, well.
Well, because I'm running, I might do what I'm
I like
doing that, or because I teach a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, like we're like
I
parts of
Are you
it.
on
started, I mean, the coconut oil, I just make sure that thing is.
Oh, and then I put it all in and tell me.
But see, but I have, yeah.
Really? Huh.
I use
But
it.
no, but it's, I have two separate, one that's in my bathroom for my kids, one that's in my kitchen.
So you don't scrape off the base and then eat it?
And then eat it,
Yeah.
is it?
Mm.
I probably like my with the mouth, so.
I mean, he says,
Hey, and then it's good for.
well, no. Is it good for them though? Because cats have another body kind of.
They did die,
Yeah.
so I,
It's not chocolate.
yeah, I was thinking it's okay.
What's
But
that
that
called?
would be enough for them to like.
Yeah.
Then I'll just send you one.
No, maybe that's it.
Well, I mean, like, you'd be able to, like create lists.
One,
So, like,
Oh, and agree, let's
see, my only stress right now, honestly, is space. That's the only test I think about, which is not, because I need places. But,
Did you sign up for it?
yeah, it's 18th, that's why, like, that's the only thing I've
That's
been
next
thinking
week.
about.
so I
You see, that's the same day that the paper is.
Yeah. That's why, that's all I'm thinking about. I think about work and base, that's another thing about.
Wow.
Which is,
Wow.
Do you see friends on there too?
because that's the only thing that,
You're
that's
a
a
mouth.
loophole as Chris would call it.
Yeah.
They have a
Mouth.
Yeah, oh, she has, I know, yeah.
Yeah, do you have hers? You should get
I have a Facebook. And, what's his face, passed just this past week. And I think last week.
Yeah, I had it earlier, and then I was like, well, I got the online part of it.
Darkest skin guy,
Yeah, it's like $5 a month or 45 for
and PDQ with us. We only have one.
Melvin?
Oh, no, actually, okay, technically, we have three, but,
Oh my god,
not-
I got fired.
not Melvin, not
And apparently
Paul.
he had like this terrible temper tantrum.
Not
and he started
Melvin, not
destroying
Paul,
the
who's the other
place.
guy?
Did you hear the
My
band?
God.
No, not me, I know
Maybe
it's
you're
you.
After the video,
Yes.
like, that kind of got all fired.
Do you know who I'm talking about? Who trained you?
Here we are.
Oh, Chuck?
No, Miguel trained me.
Miguel, there we go. Yeah.
Miguel.
He passed.
You passed what?
His base, his past.
Oh,
did he?
Yeah.
All right, folks, I'm gonna start.
Okay.
Hey, he was just asking some questions about high carb, low carb diets. The words that we want to have here are isocaloric diets.
Say that again, ISO.
Isocaloric meaning the same amount of calories.
Okay.
All right. So, but I'm gonna go back in time here to a woman named Lulu Hunt Peters. Wrote this book in 1912, and she was referencing Wilbur Atwater, the guy that's featured in here, the guy that wrote those articles on what calories were, all the early experiments on humans. So, just a reminder of all the calories, the modern calories we know it. All the data for that was finished and figured out by burning food in a bomb calorimeter. You guys know what a bomb calorimeter is?
No.
A bomb calorimeter is just a thing, a closed vessel. You put food in, burn it, combust it. What's it produce? So how do we measure it using the heat? Water. So the water absorbs the heat. So 100% of if it's a really nice, tightly controlled unit without wasting the heat, they want to capture all that heat, right? So they know that's how much heat was in the food, calories. Well, if you save 99.999% of the heat, you go, well, I know how much calories, energy is in that food. So that's what they did. They just burned it, all right? So here it is from 1895. Protein, fat, and carbs, fuel value. And you've got a little bar graph showing the fuel value of how much energy is in there, right? Okay. What are the four products of metabolism? Not carbohydrate.
No, CO2, I mean.
Let's focus on heat. Let's focus on heat. So food energy produces only one type of energy. It's just re-expressed into only one type of energy, meaning heat. You eat the energy, and it can be expressed as nothing, just stored as energy. Or it can be expressed as kinetic energy, meaning movement. And the third, heat. Brain experiment. What if 100% of the calories you ate were wasted as heat? Yeah, you'd cease to exist. Here she wrote back in 1912, which should be written today just to get the argument over with because it's just so simple. Then people have been proved to radiate 50% more heat per pound than fat people. In other words, fat people are regular fireless cookers. They hold the heat in and cannot get out through the packing of the food, which is also contained therein. Goes merely on with fiendish blah, blah, blah. Perfect. She mastered the science of the second law of thermodynamics, which is why, if you want to read another article I have, written by Fine and Feynman, whatever happened to the law, whatever happened to the second law of thermodynamics? That's the title. Why are they titling it that way? Because they're saying the same thing that you and I are saying, which is these nutritionists, writers, authors, whomever the heck they are, say a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. No, it's not. Not to a human body. Because you can take isocaloric diets. Let's say one that's high in fat, 80% fat. Let's not go that extreme. Say 60% fat, like the musher dog. 60% fat, 20% protein, 20% carbs. Take the same amount of calories, but make it 65% carbs. In an animal, an American, who've got an obvious job, and then the rest protein and fat. Same amount of calories. According to the nutritionist, everything should just function the same in each person, right? Where did they go wrong? They went wrong a long time ago because, one, glycogen depletion is clearly like a simple way to even get across to a child. Hey, fuel tank, if your muscles hold this much glycogen but you only use a third of it, well, should you have a high carb or low carb diet? Anybody with sense goes, well, only a little bit. Lower carbs. Duh. Okay, thank you. That's easy. This isn't easy. Metabolism produces heat. If 100% of the calories you ate are wasted as heat, you cease to have mass. This is so simple. Mass or heat. Okay, so Andrea, you and I are clones now. And let's say that you and I eat the same amount of calories. We're the same in everything we do, the same everything. But let's say that out of all the calories you eat, 60% of the calories are wasted as heat. 40% are saved as mass. But in me, 40% of the calories are wasted as heat. 60% saved as mass. Who weighs more? Yeah. Because the calories are being expressed in two different ways, either stored as mass or wasted as heat. Or even, we're neglecting movement because that's small. Let's throw it out. She got it right. That's why the thyroid hormone is called the respiration hormone. People get slow thyroids, low thyroid, hypothyroidism. What do you do on a fire if you're just starting a fire? Right, and then it burns hotter, right? Mm-hmm. That's how you should think of the thyroid hormone. It is the respiration hormone. So if you have a larger mitochondria, you can burn more fat, right? We're talking about burning again. We're simply talking about burning stuff. So if you have a bigger firebox, what's going to happen? You produce more heat. You can eat more calories. You burn more fat. And as people get older, I'll get to that in a second. Pretty simple. I think I just killed this. You either waste more heat, or you waste less heat. People that are generally, keep it the most simple. Forget about leptin and all of dissecting it down. People that are thin generally just radiate the heat and they lose more of the calories, are lost as heat. That's simple. And isocaloric diets show that. And so the idea of a calorie is crap. What he was asking was, there was these people that were just generally told to eat a higher fat diet and not worry about anything else. And they lost weight. Why was that? That's why.
Okay. What about the second part of the question now?
Let's go to the second part now. What was your second part?
The second part is, if they eat the carbohydrates are eventually going to be turned into fat anyways.
On which people? People that tend to gain weight, or people that aren't? There are people that can just eat the carbs.
Tend to gain weight.
Okay, that's why I said that about a third of the population. Like Barry Sears wrote the book called The Zone. He got this right. It's about a third of the population that on a higher carb diet will gain weight. Their insulin levels stay high. They can't do that type of thing. Some people can get the carbs up, but they basically radiate. Some people, they're not. That insulin really matters. There's still a big difference between a lot of people. But don't get me wrong. Look how far back in time this was understood. One of the reasons I'm saying this, I want you to understand why I put this book together the way I did. Here's Atwater again, right above next page after the calorie chart. Food may be defined as material which, when taken into the body, serves to either form tissue or yield energy, mass or energy, or both. This definition includes all the ordinary food materials, since they both build tissue and yield energy. Here's the next sentence that matters. It includes sugar and starch, because they yield energy and form fatty tissue. They knew back in the late 1800s that excessive starch and sugar formed fatty tissue on animals. So, for the other, people that, some people just can't get away with it. They got to not eat starch and carbs or overcarb.
Why don't their bodies just burn the fat that they end up making?
Because the excess of carbs generally spike insulin levels. Insulin is a storage hormone. That's the whole argument with insulin, is that when you have high insulin levels, you shut down the release of fatty acids into the bloodstream to even be burned. Because the body is in a hormonal state to store the energy and not burn it. So that comes down mostly to the insulin, the carb-insulin connection on that. So those people need to do two things, really. Have protein and fat that have slow carb absorption, glucose absorption, to not spike insulin levels, and not overcarb. So it's a two-pronged deal. with
What are
those
slow
folks.
acting, carb, it's like beans and it's like insulin.
Some beans can for some people, but generally not. Because how often are people eating beans by themselves anyway? You know, what you should be doing is like maybe sauteing them in olive oil, or having some oil with it, and maybe some chicken or eggs, Tex-Mex style. You getting that? Why did I show this earlier? Did you see this one earlier? Let me put it up. Back to the beginning of, and I know where this one is. I'll have it right out in a second. I can look it up. It's not the same one I had earlier, but what I had up earlier was the same graph that showed 50 grams of glucose, boom, and then 50 grams of glucose with steak, lean beef, even lean beef, and it just flattened the line out.
Can I have that? Thank you.
Yeah. You know, since we're on this, you know, depending on the author you're reading, here's the 10 different terms that are used to define the type of carbs you eat to describe one process. Let's simplify the process. Slow the absorption down. Whole food, protein, fat, carbs. But you'll see authors use these words: simple, complex, low glycemic, high density, low density, starchy, fibrous, fast absorbing, slow absorbing. Yeah, it's all about the rate of absorption. Slow it down by eating protein and fat. However, when do you want fast absorption? After what?
After the burn.
Right. Here's another thing, if you just look back at time. Beginning in the 1880s, round milling gave way to steel rods. Like newspaper, print type things, steel rods, which white flour, that was the advent of white flour, instead of using stone mill ground. So the processed refined flour then resulted in what? Coming up, these products. Pasta, bagels, potatoes, bro. But look at the gram count, 42 grams, 45 grams. Baked potatoes, 50. Low-fat yogurts, 36. I made this back in the mid-90s. So I was bashing on the low-fat yogurts back then. Corn, honey, blah, blah, blah. Right? Now look at the gram counts in these. Real food. Orange, 12 grams. 7 cherries. Quarter cantaloupe, 11 grams. So people started getting a heck of a lot more carbohydrates throughout the 1900s. If you look at the fat intake, it's been fairly constant. If you look at the carb intake, soda pop and all this, carbs went up. Anybody ever see Super Size Me? You know what blew me away at the end wasn't the fat, it was the sugar that he got. Yeah, he showed the fat, but then he also showed the sugar. I mean, every time he got the Super Size Me drink, which was really what the whole movie was. The funny thing is that he was focused. I think a lot of people focused on like, oh, all the fat. Well, the funny thing is that the title of the film actually referred to the name of the product, the thing that was supersized was the soda pop. It was all the sugar. Yeah, because you know as well as I do. Tell people get off the crappy sugar, the pasta, the starches. Don't even worry about fat. What happens? Often they lose weight. Yeah, it was that. So, yeah, you can have that too. So, pretty much went through the entire thing I wanted to do today. So, kind of just kicking it around now at this point. next week we don't have class, so I do need a volunteer. We're going to do a lactate test.
Week after?
Not the week after, but week.
What's the test?
Are you talking about the threshold or?
Yeah,
Unless you do a class after.
whoever wants it. You don't mind being pinpricked?
Oh, I do.
So, well, you don't have to. You can do it.
You get your
I'll
fingerprints?
do it.
I'm very much mind that.
We're getting our fingerprints?
No, she is.
No one person.
Oh,
I'll do
I
it.
will.
I wanna know what my lactate threshold is.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how you figure out the lactate threshold?
Well,
Is it accurate?
we're gonna go. Yeah, we're gonna go down to the fitness lab.
Okay, I'll give you my finger too. I like lactate.
Can't do everybody,
Please, would you?
but
Are you on
You
the
big fish
it's
first.
cool to get. It's cool to get resting levels actually too, just to see what that is. You can
prick
actually.
us before we go downstairs and then prick us while we're downstairs.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know what I want to talk about here. Let's talk about the opposite. Let's put things in relationship in a different way. Check this out. Here we go. Kind of bookends to the whole introduction to oxygen consumption. So we're at rest, you're at idle, right? Like a car. Oxygen consumption is low. We'll do a lot of fitness books, exercise physiology books, highfalutin training centers, geeked out, amped up athletes like to brag about the endurance type. What do they like to brag about? What do they want to get tested? Yeah. Like it's a measure of their fitness, right? I say boo. And there's more articles I'll give you to read about that if you like. We'll actually cover. This is where we're going, is in more into the oxygen consumption anyway. Today was the beginning. Clearly, you already understand this. You can have a high VO2 max, but you can produce the power to outrun somebody with a high VO2 max. If most sprinters, because you can produce the power just by fermentation. So, but as far as like the true measure of fitness and longevity, true health as you get older, is your blood flowing to deliver the oxygen? Because guess who's getting this? Yeah. Which is people with crappy blood flow. All right? So a true measure is this. One MET, I actually wrote this in this week's lecture, by the way, it's in there. Here at Idle. We'll end up doing some stuff, I already said, compare humans to mice. Let's just put this in perspective, I'll do it again. A human at idle is consuming, on the average, about 3.5 milliliters of oxygen. So we're talking like the size, I can contain a little bubble like that. 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of your body weight. A mouse is consuming 27.5 milliliters per kilogram of their body weight. At rest. That's at rest. Like I said, most athletes and people want to go, well, how high can you go? I'm saying, well, how can you prevent yourself from going low? Because put everything in reverse now. When a person gets older or sick, infirm, sedentary, if your cells aren't using aerobic metabolism, what is it using to produce the energy? Exactly, and then you're producing acids. Then you can go from that point unraveling to all the health problems associated with that, by the way. Okay? This is where understanding a cell allows you to go, oh, I understand every disease now. Not everyone, but a lot of them. So, once you start, in my opinion, what's better to look at people as they get older is if your resting oxygen consumption is low. Because that's a reflection of your brain, all your cells not getting enough oxygen. What's the number one thing facing elderly people? Well, not the number one thing, but one of the number one things outside of strokes, heart disease, all the number one killers. Outside of the number one killers, heart attack, strokes, heart disease, strokes, diabetes, all those things. What's the one that really scares people and it sucks because you don't even know the person's there anymore?
Alzheimer's.
Yeah, cognitive decline, Alzheimer's. That's why this matters. If your brain cells aren't, it's all about the blood. So you're going to learn more about blood. I'll speak about blood. That's why I formulate my water. That's what that was all about. Kidney health, blood, heart, blood, and blood flow. If you got all that covered, your oxygen consumption is going to relatively stay high at rest. But once that diminishes, you're on your way out, man. And everything will suffer, especially your eyes, the brain. That's why dogs and old people, think about it, as they get older, it's the first things that go. Toes, fingers get cold in people. Their eyes are lose function. They need glasses. I don't need glasses yet. I'm like, wow, holy crap. One eye's a little off, but anyway, that's the point of this. Is resting, what's happening at rest is actually more important. So a lot of people think it's all about the fitness, do. And what we're doing in this class is look at everything I'm doing this entire semester. I'll remind you again, it's at rest or full on, and everything in between. And it all comes back down to this, the egg should, a cell. So
are you finally going to give us the formula for your water?
No.
Why not?
I don't give that away.
Is it patented?
I'm actually developing right now as we speak a preventing cognitive decline program that I want to sell. So I'm not even I'm not going to talk about that, but I'll point to things about it. But I'm not going to put it all together for you guys. Do your own work. But that's why I'm teaching you the way I'm teaching you, by the way. Because, be mechanics of the body, really. Trainers, that's what you are. So, how many people? 1, 2. Oh, yeah. Somebody pass the sheet out for attendance.
Oh.
Crappy attendance today. Everybody did good on the test.